So look, thanks a million. Last session of the day, so fair play to anyone who's managed to hang around to this part of it. I won't keep you, hopefully I'll keep you engaged for a part of it anyway. So what I want to chat about is, I suppose it's really based upon my own learnings of working with initially Power BI and now more essentially the Power Platform, all right? And I suppose I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey really in terms of typically what you might do the first time you ever create a Power BI model, and then how you actually can kind of evolve that into something that actually is quite progressive within your organization, all right? A quick little bit of background about me. I've been working in data for 20 plus years. First worked on OLAP services in SQL 7 way back a long time ago, and then through all the different variations of analysis services, as well as obviously the database engine itself, integration services, and all that side of stuff. But I've been pretty much business intelligence focused for the last 20 years. So, and all of that time, except for a brief foray into SAP, it's all been on the Microsoft platform. So what I'm going to chat to you today, right, and I suppose this is what I'm going to be covering. All right, this is based on my own experience of building reporting solutions using Power BI, Automate, SharePoint, Office 365, and Teams. As such, what we are going to see demoed in here is Power BI, Power Automate, SharePoint, Office 365, and Teams. I should rename Office 365 to Microsoft 365 now, of course, but anyway. So that's what we're going to be talking about. If you're expecting to see something else, if you want to see something else, it's not going to come up in here. All right, this is what I'm chatting about. So this is your get out of jail time if you need to kind of go, whoops, not what I need to see. So most of this is going to be based around a demo. And I want to chat a little bit about that demo, and it's very much real world based. I have a lot of clients that would have a very, very similar requirement such as this. But this particular client that I'm basing it on basically called me in and saying, we need to combine our budget company sales and retail sales. Why? Because their budget is in one system, their company sales is in another system, and they're a wholesaler, so they're a manufacturer, so they sell into wholesalers, but they also get an eye on retailers when you go into shop and buy it, and that was a third different system. So every time they wanted to kind of get a view across this, there's, as you might have guessed, a lot of VLOOKUP and extracts and data downloads and all this going on. So they had three sources of data. They wanted to create reports for users. In a nutshell, that was their business requirement. If we were to talk about a little bit more, their company sales that came from an ERP system. Their retail sales came from actually their Excel files that were sent from what we call as a data aggregator. And their budget data, like a lot of organizations out there, lots of work they do in Excel to come up with a wonderful budget. So as such, as a demo, I find is a fairly typical scenario that organizations or departments are working in. And often there's a challenge to try to put a solution in place for this. So my engagement with this client anyway was to fix this problem. So before I go into demo, and most of my presentation is going to be demo based, I just want to talk about, I suppose, what I would call my Power BI Data Projects 101 slide. And this is a generalization, but most data projects have four key aspects to it. There's the part where you have to get your data out of a source system. So in the context of this demo, I'm going to be using a Power Query M or get data to get data out of my system. There's then the modeling part, and modeling is interesting because modeling is recognizing the fact that your source system may not contain the data in a way that's ideal for reporting. So you change it and you create a model to actually work for you that says this is good for reporting. And we're going to be doing Power BI Desktop. From a visualization point of view, we're going to be using Power BI Desktop and PowerBI.com. And then a sharing, which is finally having built my reports, I want to share it out to users. You're using PowerBI.com. So to me, most data projects are working. They also have those four elements to it. And really, you're just talking about different technologies to use to meet those different, those four key aspects. Now, lots of projects fall into this mode. Yes, some data projects undoubtedly can kind of skip that first phase and then maybe even that second phase, depending on how mature your organization is. Sometimes you just need to create a report, in which case you might be already tacking onto an existing Power BI model or analysis services cube that could be sitting somewhere. Or maybe you can go straight to a source system and all the data is in there. But by and large, the more complicated ones probably certainly involve getting data out and modeling. Okay. So that's my data projects 101, and I think it helps to set the context of what I'll try to be doing in here. So if I was to look at phase one, this is all about modeling to me, okay? And this basically is, I'm using Power BI Desktop as my world for everything. So I'm using it to get my data, I'm using it to model my data, I'm using it to create my reports, and I'm going to publish it up onto PowerBI.com. If I was to look at that from an architecture point of view, I get something that looks a little bit like this. So here are my on-premise data sources that this client has. They had an ERP system, they had budget in Excel, and they get more retail data in other Excel files. Then over here we got PowerBI.com. Users get to the reports by going on to PowerBI.com, and this bit in the middle is the Enterprise Gateway Connector. So that's a technology that you install onto an on-premise server, and it allows the Power BI service to communicate with on-premise data sources. There's a fourth thing in here which I'll talk about briefly, and I leave this in deliberately because it shows another nice aspect that you can do with Office 365. But to make this solution work for the client, there was a big problem in that the product codes of retail sales were not the same product codes that they had for ERP and budget. So you could never mash these together unless, of course, you had some sort of master data sheet in the middle that basically mapped one code to another code. So in the context of this demo and for this client, they also had a master sheet to combine this data together as well. So it goes in there. Okay, so that's phase one. Guys, I just want to do a check that everything's working okay in the screen side of things in there, and you can hear me and the pace is okay?
Yeah, pace is all good. I can hear you and I can see all the slides going past.
Super, and you can see my big red, you can see my big dot, yeah?
Yeah, you've got one of the nice Logitech pointers like I have.
Yep, sweet.
Excellent.
Great. So let's go in and let's look at a demo of how we get to phase one. Just in case you're wondering how many phases I have, there's 257 phases, so it'll only take me 10 hours to get through this. No, only joking, I've got 3 phases. All right, so that's what we're doing. So let's look at phase one. So again, hoping you can still see my screen here, guys, just working away on the screen, and you should see Power BI Desktop now.
Yeah, we've got desktop.
Yep, super. So if I was starting from scratch, okay, in which case I'm even going to hide that pretty little picture, okay. Your temptation, you'll always kind of start with the whole, well, I got to get data out, right? It was the first point up I had in my system, okay. So if I was talking through that, I want to get to my data sources. Before we'd even do that, let's do a quick little bit of examination of my data sources. I didn't go to the trouble of installing an ERP system on my VM here, but I do have worldwide importers and SQL Server, which will do perfectly for what I need. And if I expand that down, specifically, I'm going to be interested in these tables down here, invoice lines and invoice headers. Other data sources that was worth having a look at over here. Well, I mentioned that I had a budget sheet. And I don't know how many people out there have seen budget sheets that look like this, but I've seen an awful lot of budget sheets that look like this, okay? Because accountants, God bless them, they love columns. They love putting dates in columns. So they start with a January or a week or a day, and they give me loads and loads and loads of columns over to the right-hand side. So no surprise, when I was looking at this customer's budget, it was very, very similar to this setup. But all this is really is just a stock code and a list of and a predicted sales going on for budget. Close that off, won't need it again. And the other thing I wanted to show in here was I also have a master data sheet. So I was talking about my retail sales. So you can see in here, I just got a mapping code where I map one code over to one of my own central codes. So again, just a nice straightforward little mapping table. Won't need to see that again. And if I was to look at my retail sales, I'm going to go in here and I can see retail sales in here. And if I was to open up one of these files, again, a very simple file. They're basically going to go, well, here's the SKU codes, there's a brand, here's some information about it, this is what we've sold for you, okay? So that's a quick overview of all of my data sources that I have in here. And if I was going straight into build mode, you've gone to your Power BI desktop in a day session, or you've watched a few YouTubes, you'd be kind of going, great, let's just go to work and get it done, right? So you're going to start off and get data. I'm going to get my data from Excel because I know one of those sheets is Excel down there. And I'm going to go straight into my budget. And I'm going to open up my budget sheet. And after a couple of seconds, we are going to start seeing data inside in Excel. So here we go. So it's picking up that I got a budget sheet, and actually I've also got a data table in there. So it's just picking up the fact that it's a data table. And if I click on this, I can get a preview of what I was looking at. And as you can see, it was just what I showed you earlier. And then Power BI gives you this very tempting yellow load button, which I've never yet clicked, because I'm always clicking the button right beside it, transform data. Because rarely, if ever, is the data that clean that we're going to. There's always going to be some element of, I got to tidy this up a bit. Now this is opened up. Now you're seeing lots of other things over here, which for now just pretend doesn't exist, okay? Because this obviously is my pre-canned. I've built it before because I don't want to take you through building an entire solution. But if we look at what's happened already in terms of what I've brought in, I can clearly see my Excel sheet in here. And if I look over on the right-hand side, I get these steps. Sort of first, and you can replay these. So if I was to go look at my first one, well, my first one was my source. Just go to that budget sheet and it shows me all the data that's available. Then I navigate it, pick out a particular sheet. Then I do if you notice here, if you look at the headers, they're all in the first row. And then there was an automatic promotion of headers going on. And then there was a little bit of change in data types happening in there as well. Okay, so some transformation steps happen straight away. Now, I'm an IT person, and I've already mentioned that I don't like data going along in columns in here. So one of the first things I'm going to want to fix here is that, right? I want to get rid of that. So if we're talking through that, I'd be kind of going, okay, let's select all of those columns. Let's go to transform. Let's do an unpivot, and boom, we've unpivoted my data. And if you're data heading, it's now in a much more familiar shape for me, because I now know, like, this is great. I got one column now that contains my period, which is what I want over here. I'm going to rename this one thing over here to budget value. You might note there that the data type looks a little bit odd, so we'll change that data type into decimal number. And then looking here, I'm going, great, I got a stock code, I got a period, I got a budget value. I don't really need this. Okay, so let's just get rid of it. All right, and then I might call this whole thing budget values. Okay, and what you've noticed happening over here is I've started building up more steps. So again, I can always go back and replay a step going on, or I can go back and insert new steps if I need to. And these steps, and we'll need to see these a little bit later on, what you're actually doing when you create those, so I go into Advanced Editor, you're creating this thing called M code, okay? And here's the actual text behind each one of those steps. So you could, if you want, go in here and just code up M code, but you know, not many people would. And that's what's going on behind the scenes in there, okay? So you step through that whole process, and then obviously you're going to have to repeat for your other data sources. And I'm not going to go repeat for the other data sources in here, but I just wanted to give you, I suppose, a flavor of how you would go about building and getting the data out of the system. But let's look at how I did it for some of the other systems. You'll notice in here, I'm a little bit of a big Kimball methodology believer in data warehouses. So I got it splits into facts, dimensions, and reference queries in here. If I was to expand that facts folder, we'll see that inside there, I've got 3 tables. One is called company sales, one is called retail sales, and one is called budget. This makes sense. I mentioned that I got 3 data sources, right? If I was to look at that company sales, the same as you see before, I got my little steps, so I could step back a little bit and see what did I do for my source here. And I'll actually read it from the top where I can see it did some sort of join between a query called lines and a query called headers. And if I go looking at that and pop into reference queries, I can see over here invoice header and invoice lines. So I've got another set of queries back here. And these are my initial queries that are going back to my SQL Server system. So again, I can step back and I'll see up in there, there's my connection to a SQL database. So I can create queries that go to SQL Server, and then I can reference those queries and use them in further queries and start building up a whole kind of chain of levels and interactions in between my queries in here. And that's what I've basically done with my reference queries. They're things that are doing work for me in the background, and then I can turn around and combine them nicely together inside in here. So if I look through the rest of them, there's my company sales. Here are my retail sales that I've gone through onto it, which is got a lot more steps going on here. There's a bit more involved in getting here, but it's still pretty much a replay of all the steps you do. And finally, here's the actual finished budget sheet that I was looking at earlier. It's slightly different from the one I loaded in that it's got a date, but again, it's pretty much the same transformations as we did before. So it's just a little bit of work on how to get all that data out. Now, having done that, I won't go changing that. I won't go saving that change. You'll then end up back in here, all right? So I've got my data out. If you go back to my 4 steps, get your data, model your data, okay? So this is me modeling my data. I've got a table in here now called company sales, a table called retail sales, and a table called budget. And all I've done is I've created relationships between these tables and my other dimensional tables that I got going on here, customer, calendar, product. Sometimes it's easier to see them in their own independent planes, independent windows. So here's my company sales relationships. There's my retail sales relationship. And here's my budget sales relationship. So having created those joins in there and created relationships, you then end up in the building world where I can turn around and I always start with a data table because it just gives me the best understanding of what I'm looking at. So having done that, I can now go, okay, my original requirement was to combine budget with retail sales and company sales. So I can turn around and start clicking on these and clicking on these and click this and getting 3 values. And say now I can start looking at this by a month and ignore my visualization. You are getting a sense straight away that, yeah, I'm beginning to get an allocation between my, I'm beginning to be able to allocate my budget against my retail and against my company sales. So as such, you're getting to the visualizations. Now, I'm not going to build any more visualizations in here other than to show you the couple of crap ones that I've created, all right? But they're in Power BI. It's the normal click interface that you get with Power BI. So I click on this and it does a slice across. Click on this one, it slices again. I can turn around, I can change my brand to look at other products out there to see how they're getting on. I want to draw your attention to that 39K because that's going to be my test figure, all right? I'm expecting that to increase later on if all goes well in my demos. But basically this is, say, my report that I wanted to create for people. So 4 steps, done the first 3, get my data, model my data, create a visualization. The last one is share my data. So doing that from here, I will go straight into publish Power BI. I'll save my changes, apply those changes later. And now this is popping up a connection to my Power BI instance. And I can see in here my different workspaces. I can select my workspace and I can go along and hit select, and that will publish that up to Power BI. So I haven't done the publishing because it's been done earlier, but if I was to look at that in what we see, we will end up with a view that looks something like this when I'm inside in Power BI. So I've got my data sets and data flow planes, and inside there, I've got a data set called Sales V1. The last time that refreshed was about a week ago, which is the last time that I ran this demo on the 25th, okay? Also inside in here, when I go and looking at my content, I've got a Sales V1 report. And if I go in here, I see the same report that I've shown to you earlier. Okay, with again, keeping an eye on that 39K figure because that's going to be my test case for later on. So as such, I've achieved what I wanted to do. The client brought me in, said, can you combine these 3 data sources together? Can you create some reports? Can you publish them? Can you share them out to users? And it's done. But let's go back and kind of be, I suppose, somewhat critical of it, okay? This is what we went through. We showed a demo. I've ended up with a single Power BI solution. It would be effective, but it feels kind of very standalone, not really something that's part of the corporate culture yet, even though it contains corporate data. And also I had to do a little bit of work to get some additional data maintenance in there. So, you know, there's pros and cons to this. So let's move on to phase 2, which is redesign it a little bit and start leveraging Office a little bit. So Power BI is still going to play a very significant role in here. It's going to be involved in the extracting and the modeling and visualizations as before, but I'm going to introduce something new called data flows. So data flows are very, very powerful. This client, when I went in and did the work with them, did the work for them, we got their first model. It was deemed a success, thankfully. They then called me back to create a second model. The information in the second model was a lot more sensitive and confidential, so they really didn't want it in their first model, even though we could have had security conversations, but the decision was fine, we'll do a separate model in there. But this gives me a problem straight away because I had code in my first model, that M code that you saw, and now I'm going to have to put that exact same code into my second model, and we know that's not a good idea, right? Because now I've got double maintenance of my code. If I have to make a change, I got to change it in 2 places. And what if I end up with a third model and a fourth model and a fifth model? My code will start going to be all over the place, and we just know that's wrong. So data flows is a way of addressing that. I like to think of it as like you're sharing data, but you're not sharing the report. A Power BI to me is very much you're sharing reports with a data model behind it, whereas a data flow, you're saying just here's raw data. But you're putting that up in the cloud, you're putting that up in Power BI, so you're putting your code into the one location, and then any model that needs to get to, that needs to reference it, references my data flow. So data flow is going to be new in here. I'm going to bring Excel into the mix in there as well, because particularly when you're dealing with accountants, there's nothing like giving them data straight inside an Excel. And then also I wanted to bring in SharePoint and Teams, because they used SharePoint as an infrastructure in SharePoint Online as part of their infrastructure. So it seemed, well, you're using this, let's keep you using the same technology you have all the time. And plus, you got Teams. Begin to adopt Teams and says, well, we can start putting your BI data straight into Teams as well. Really try to bring it closer to your users. So our infrastructure now looks a little bit like this. Go and do a quick pause and just see, is everything okay there, guys? Have any questions popped up or anything like that?
No, everything's good. No questions so far. So everyone's obviously following along quite happily.
Super, thank you.
Okay, no worries.
So if we look at our infrastructure this time, first bit over here is the same, right? I've still got my 3 data sources. I've still got my enterprise gateway connector. But my master data sheet is gone. It's no longer there. I always hated this master data sheet, all right? Because it feels like I'm using Excel to maintain something and it's just that little bit locked and lost and hidden away in a file share and forgotten about, but still key to the whole solution. So where will we put it? Well, we'll put it up here. We'll put it into a SharePoint list because we're using SharePoint, and if I put it into a list, I can kind of control it a lot easier. I've still got my model still sitting here in Power BI, but as I have SharePoint, I'll actually make SharePoint one of the ways you can start interacting with that model. So again, keeping that kind of proximity to users. They can connect to obviously their PowerBI.com account straight via their browser of their choice or phone. But I also want to introduce this way of doing it as well, where we can have our Excel connected onto our Power BI model and where we can embed things right into Teams in there as well. So this is the infrastructure that I want to start to get into now. So let's demo that up. So sticking with my, starting with PowerBI.com, I'm going to go back to my content. And here we saw data sets and data flows. We'll just close that there. Here's my data sets and data flows. And if I look in here, these guys down here, these are all data sets, right? They've got that little kind of a stacked up disk drive icon. But up here, I've got a data flow. If I click on this, I have a data flow called company sales. This is the entity, company sales. It returns all this information to me. And if I go editing that data flow, it brings me into a Power BI, a Power Query editor up in the cloud. So this is very, very similar to what I just saw inside in PowerBI.com, except I'm entirely cloud facing at this point in time. And as before, I get my steps that I can replay and I get to see my data down here. So all of that is now sitting up on PowerBI.com. And interestingly, because it sits up on PowerBI.com now, you've now got individual control over it as well. So you don't actually have to go along with the refresh schedule that you'd had in Power BI. This can be on its own refresh schedule. And also, where does it put that data? When it actually refreshes in company sales, it has to put it somewhere, right? So what it actually does is it puts it as a blob object sitting in Azure Gen 2 storage. If you haven't configured it, it will put it in its own proprietary kind of Gen 2 storage location that you don't have access to, but you can actually configure your Power BI tenant to put these objects into your own Gen 2 storage. So actually data flows can be kind of used as a way to load data into a data lake, which might be an interesting use case to be using for them. But for now, it's a blob object. As soon as I refresh, blob object sitting in data lake Gen 2. So that's what my data flow is about, but how do I work with it? So if I go back to here, I'm going to close off this model and I have this other model over here. If I go to edit my queries, let's look to see what's different, all right? So in fact, even before we go into the queries, let's close that out and let's go looking at my data model to see what's different. And the answer is nothing's different. My data model is the same data model. There was nothing wrong with my company sales, my retail sales, and my budget. All that was wrong was reuse of code when I'm going onto other systems and trying to tidy things up in there and going to SharePoint instead of Excel. But the fundamental model was the same. So it remains the same. When I go into edit my queries, I can see, as before, I've got my fact queries down here. There's my retail sales, my budget, my company sales. But if I look at my company sales, the last time when I was using company sales, I had a few steps over here because if you remember, I was joining to invoice header 1, invoice header, invoice details, joining them together, doing a few things. Whereas now I've got a straight source and navigation. And if I go looking at that source, you can see how it's actually pointing to Power BI data flows. So if I was building that again, I'd be kind of going, okay, new data source, but this time I want you to connect to the Power Platform. And inside there, I can see Power BI data flows. And I connect to that. And inside here, it's picking up my different workspaces that I have. So I'll go into my Reboot My Analytics. And there's my company sales data flow that I've created. And here's my preview of what I've just been looking at. And I can then turn around and go, okay, let's bring that in. That connects up to the Gen 2 storage and pulls down the object. So here I am now. So I've recreated my company sales in just 2 clicks. Excuse me. So you can see how that could have an awful lot of benefit if you were sharing company sales amongst lots of different objects in there, okay? You've cut down an awful lot in code reuse. It's much more efficient going on. Plus you're saving yourself a bit of time as well, in that you're not having multiple models pulling data. They're all going to the one data flow now, which is its own controlled refresh side of things. Let's check some of the other differences in here. So sticking with company sales for a second, because I no longer have those invoice header and invoice line subqueries, they no longer exist up in my reference queries. But if you look at my lines here, SB customer map and SB retail to product map, I hadn't shown you this the last time because it was just connecting to an Excel file, but this is just, in this case, connecting back to here, a SharePoint list. Now I'd have to refresh my credentials to get that, which is fine, but I'll just jump and show you the actual SharePoint list. This is my SharePoint list, or rather this is my SharePoint page. And inside in here, I've got my SharePoint list, which is now acting as my data source into my Power BI model. So try to fix that up. I'd probably have to go reset some parameters in here, so I probably won't go to that trouble. Good, quick one in here. While that's trying to do a refresh in here, I'll keep talking through the other things that happens onto it. But all that will basically happen there is it will make a connection onto SharePoint, and I would see my SharePoint list and I can put in my data. So it just becomes another data source for me, okay? So you do your bit of re-engineering work back in here to point back to data flows, point to the SharePoint. Your data model remains the same, which means you don't have to really do any changes on the report side of things. So then you would end up simply, again, as you did before, publishing up to PowerBI.com. And in my case, I have this one published up as Sales V2. So it's now available. I can click on it and go running queries on it, but I'm actually going to stay with Sales V1 because I'm finishing off the demo around the Sales V1 side of things. So that's me changing how I connect the data, but we've already also seen now how I can use SharePoint as a way to interact with that model. So let's go back to this SharePoint homepage. And you can see there's various Power BI charts getting rendered in here. So I'm kind of giving a little bit more of a dashboard feel to users in here now. If they're already familiar with SharePoint and using SharePoint, you can turn around and go, okay, well, I've got a SharePoint document library in here. I put my usual things into my SharePoint document library, my documents, whatever, or my lists, everything else. Plus, I can have Power BI reports sitting inside it. And these Power BI reports are in the same way interactive as you've seen before. You can click on it, you can change things around. If you got parameters, you can change pages. You get the normal experience that you would get anywhere else Power BI, except it's closer to your users, right? It's sitting in SharePoint. It feels a lot closer to them now. I can make it even closer than that again, though. I can go into a Teams environment. So here's a Teams environment that I'm in, and I'll go to my Reboot Teams. And inside in here, I've got my normal posts, my files, my wiki areas. And then if you see this tab over here, Sales V1, if I click on that, that's going to render me that exact same Power BI report sitting inside in a Teams environment. So there we are again. There's my 39K figure that we've been seeing the whole time, and my normal interactivity between them. And on top of it, I can do chat in this, because it's all part of Teams now, right? So I can turn around and chat to another user in my organization. They're going to get an email notification or a chat notification on Teams wherever they're sitting to kind of go, okay, I sent a chat. And when they go back into it, they're going into the same chat with the same context of the query of the report that I was looking at in here. So you're making this same report that we saw in version 1 feel a lot closer to your actual business users who doing their daily day job in there, okay? And then you might turn around and kind of go, I need to get really analytical with my data, so I want to create my own report, right? So we know how to create a report inside in Power BI. One way of doing that is I can turn around and kind of go, okay, well, I want to create a report, right? When I do that, I see lots of things that I can create reports against, but Sales V1 is the one that I'm interested in. And this is me working up in the cloud with Power BI now. This is not me downloading Power BI desktop, and I'm brought into an empty page in here, and now I can turn around and start putting on my objects that I was talking about, that I was working with before, and we look at this across my products and my stock items, etc., and we're getting to my data, which is great. We can turn around, we can create a user can create their own report for themselves. They can go away and save that as they want, which is allowing them obviously to be interactive with their data, or they can go full pivot table on this if they want. Because if I click up in here on my report I've created, there's an option called Analyze in Excel. So I click on Analyze in Excel, and after a couple of seconds, I get this download going on over here. So I open that, and this opens up a pivot table to my Power BI model that I've just published up in the cloud. And I can start working with that like any other pivot table that I normally would. Change that to tabular form and there we go. So now I'm in a full kind of interactive mode, pivot table style, that I can work with my data in there as well, all coming from that exact same model. So if I was to kind of critique what we've done here, we wanted to do a redesign, brought in data flows, brought in Excel, brought in SharePoint, brought in Teams. This is my architecture I have in here. And as such, as a result in there, I'm saying, well, there's a lot of good pluses in here now. I've got single data sources introduced for multiple models. I've got a SharePoint Online data maintenance area. I've got a SharePoint dashboard in there, and I've also got a Teams dashboard in there as well. Plus, I can do pivot tables on top of it. So it feels like I'm offering a lot more to my client now. I'm bringing the data really into their organization, sitting close to the same tools that they're working with on a daily basis. What happens after this? So there actually is a third phase that I want to talk about, and this is the automate phase, because there was a gap in this. And it's centered around these retail files in particular, because these retail files, as I mentioned earlier, they're sent to them from data aggregator companies, and those data aggregator companies send them via email, and they send it to one particular individual inside the organization. So that one individual's got to take those emails, detach them, put them onto a network share, and then wait for the refresh to happen, which is fine, except obviously this person sometimes will take a holiday, or they won't be in for a day, or they're out sick. And then there's that whole question of, well, what's happened to that data? It hasn't come in this week. How do we fix this? So it's kind of conversation point of, well, how do you go about fixing this? So in this case, we're going to leverage Power Automate to do this. So down here, I've got a new part where I've got Power Automate is monitoring an Outlook email box. When it receives a particular email, it's going to detach those retail sales, put them onto the network drive, and it's also going to do a refresh of the Power BI service. Also got Twitter putting in here as well, just to show you can do lots of other fun things with Power Automate as well, okay? The rest of this infrastructure remains the same. So let's demo and have a look at that. So this is me gone into Power Automate, or Flow, as it's still, the URL still references, and this used to be called Flow. And you see in here, I got a few different flows going on, but one of them is called Reboot, Save My Attachment and Refresh. So if I click on this, you can see the last time I demoed this, and it's been successful every time. So hopefully that success keeps going on here. There's a few connections going on in this flow, and connecting to a file system, and connecting to Office, and connecting to Power BI. If we go in and edit this flow, these are the steps. So this is the Microsoft no-code, low-code environment, okay? And I got a few things happening here. I've got a trigger that kicks off in this data flow, all right? So when an email arrives, I have a look at this and go, okay, it's monitoring my account. So I put in the credentials to my particular email account in there. So it's monitoring my email account for when an email arrives into my inbox. And it also matches the following criteria when it's from this Gmail address and when the subject filter contains reboot. So I'm getting quite specific in what I'm looking at in here. I'm not monitoring every single email, just emails that come from this guy that contain reboot in it. When that happens, I want to do the following. I want to apply to each attachment in that email. I want to create a file. If I have a look at create a file, I can see the connection it's going to is something called Reboot Retail Sales. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned about the on-premise gateway connector and how it's a way that Power BI can connect to your on-premise data, so it can extract data to put into Power BI, but it actually works the other way around as well. In this case, Power Automate, the Power Platform, can use that same gateway to connect down to data sources and put data into data sources, or can also go down and put data onto network shares. Basically, it's a bidirectional connection between the Power Platform and your on-premise. So in here, it's made a connection to my VM. And then the last step that's going on down here is, having created that file, I want to call a refresh on my Power BI model. So in here again, I've got another connection going on, this time to Power BI and using my account. And if I look at what it's rebooting, it's refreshing, it's connecting to the Reboot Your Analytics workspace, and it's calling off the dataset sales V2 or V1. So that's what this whole flow is meant to do, all right? So we're going to test that. So if I go into my Gmail, I've got an email over here ready to go, sending it to my email address. I've got reboot up in the subject header, and down here I got 2 attachments. So let's send that. And if this all works, what I'm hoping is, this is my network share, right? Retail sales, and we can see how there's a bunch of files going on there, September, up to September. I believe I just sent the October file to me. So I'm hoping in a few seconds now that we should see this update. So I've just heard a prompt coming in that I received an email, and bang, there they go. So hopefully you saw that happening there, but there's my October file has arrived, and here's another October file has arrived in there as well. And if I click out and go back to Power BI, go to data sets and data flow, and we'll see there, if we have a look at my reboot my analytics data set, we can see it's updated now at 20 to 7, so it's already on the refresh. Okay, so my flow's kicked in. If I go back looking at my flow, and let's just do a refresh up here. Go back looking at my flow, obviously I'm going to see that there was another execution of that data set happened 47 seconds ago, it took 4 seconds to run, and it succeeded. So that should all have ended up that when I go back to here and do a repage in this, my 39K figure should hopefully have updated to, I don't know, 45 or something like that. 43. So it totally automated that process of getting the emails and refreshing my data sets. While we're in there, let's talk about that other little other things that flow can do. So I created a couple of other flows. So I have one in here, which you can see in there is pointing to Twitter. So I connected on this. And you can see this has been running for months actually. And if I go looking at the edit for this flow, so it's connecting to my Twitter account, and I've got a Twitter on Brexit because it was relevant. I should read COVID now, but anyway, I'm capturing anything said on Brexit, and having caught that, I'm then doing a detect sentiment on it, which actually means I'm connecting to my Azure Cognitive Services connection, and having got back to sentiment from there, I'm then doing an insert into a SQL database into my reboot Twitter table inside there, and that's my data source connection that I'm connecting to in there. All right, so just another little flow working a completely different way, doing something a bit different for me. But from a point of view of actually integrating all of that, these top little bar charts in here, this one over here is certainly related to my sales and volume, but these guys aren't. If you look at these, average sentiment and average sentiment last 10. So I've just basically been reporting on the average sentiment continuously to do with Brexit on there, and it's now a little bit low at the moment, and over time it's pretty much 50-50. People either love it or hate it, right? So just kind of again showing how you can use flow to kind of do some other little interesting bits and pieces of work, and then actually still integrate it into that environment in there. There's no Power BI behind that scene, by the way. Well, there is, but just the visualization part of it. There's no get query part going on because all the work is put straight into a database. So if I go back, have a look at my slide deck again. So this is all about automation. So we demoed it, and basically we've automated file load and refresh. We had a little bit of fun with sentiment. And at this point, I can probably sit back and say to my client, you know what, you got a pretty decent system going on here now. We've solved your original problem, which is combine your 3 data sources together, but we've done it in a way that awkward master data element we put into SharePoint, so at least it feels like it's in a more secure place, more maintainable. People won't be randomly deleting columns, and we can wrap security around that. Your users use SharePoint, so we can just give them a SharePoint portal where they can connect onto their normal day-to-day stuff and see their reports in the same way. They can use Teams to get to it. If they need to get ad hoc, they can use the Excel. We can integrate it. We can automate it with the whole flow side of things, as well as create your own reports inside in PowerBI.com. So there's a much more kind of compelling story being built up here now for that client, and hopefully, happy client, get more business. Great. Phase 4, I'm not demoing anything with phase 4. I suppose phase 4 is more meant to be kind of where could it go from here, right? And I suppose what we've been working with in here are parts of the Power Platform. Certainly not the whole Power Platform, but parts of it. We've seen the Power BI side of things for sure, and we've also seen the Power Automate side of things going on in there as well, okay? But there are other aspects, and I'm sure you saw sessions earlier today. I know there was a couple, I believe, on Power Apps. Maybe the one just before me was Power Apps a little bit, I'm not sure. Or no, that was Azure Functions, I think. But Power Apps is a form builder that comes with Power Platform. And now also we got Power Virtual Agents, so you can have bot frameworks having conversations with people. Underneath this, we've also seen the data connectors, how you can connect to an awful lot of different sources, how we can plug it up onto portals. We haven't touched on these guys in there. And it works very well once you're in that whole SharePoint, Excel, Office 365. And if you're a Dynamics customer, you get another level of integration going on there, again, between the Power Platform and Dynamics. So very much kind of integrating a lot of things going on there. So conclusions, and my last slide with about 10 minutes to go or 15 minutes to go, so it's good. This is pretty light. I mean, we can talk an awful lot about Power BI, but I suppose concluding what we spoke about in here, you can clearly meet lots of reporting and analytical needs. You don't have to be IT to do a lot in here. I mean, there's no reason why an IT person has to be used to create that data flow that you just saw, right? I mean, it's pretty much connections and a no-code environment going on. But sometimes data projects have some pretty complicated concepts in there, particularly in the modeling area, if you're talking about many-to-many relationships, or if you're getting into distinct count scenarios, or if you start creating your own DAX to start solving problems, or your own M. It can get complicated. So undoubtedly, it really helps if you do have IT involved in this one, but not necessarily always needed there. You could already own a lot of this stuff. I mean, a lot of organizations find they might not own the Power BI side of things, but they could already have the Office 365 up and running. So as such, they kind of have that built-in capability to do the SharePoint and the Teams and the portal and the flow already. So when you bring the Power BI in, but when you introduce Power BI, you're not introducing Power BI and a whole stack of other things. You're actually saying, well, you actually own a lot of these other things already. Okay, it's software as a service, right? So it can get expensive or it can be amazingly cost effective. If you obviously had 1,000 users, then our conversations can be very different, okay? 1,000 users by a Power BI license at €850 a month, 8,500 a month. There's going to be some conversations around that one. Maybe we should talk about Power BI Premium, for example. But if you were in a situation, and many organizations are, or many departments within a large organization are, where you've got small numbers, all right, where maybe you've got 10 or 20 users in there, suddenly that conversation point becomes a lot easier because you can say, well, I've got 10 users who need this, and it's $850 per user per month. So my solution is going to cost me €85 a month to run, right? Yes, obviously we have to develop it. But from an ongoing OpEx point of view, there's no big CapEx expenditure. The client that this demo is largely based around are a large organization in the context of where I'm from. They're turning over 15, 20 million a year, but they only ever have 5 or 6 guys who'll ever need this level of data. If I was having a conversation before Power BI, my conversation is all about SQL Server enterprise licenses, and straight away you've added on big figures before you even start doing any work for them, really. Whereas at least in the Power BI world, you turn around kind of going, well, actually, yeah, you got 6 users. So look, it's going to cost you, less than 30 or 40 quid a month to run this solution. Completely different dynamic to your engagement with an organization that way. They're pretty much my conclusions going on there, guys. I hope this was of use. I'd be delighted to take questions. I'd also be delighted to get any feedback from me. You can scan that QR code, or you can go to datasmart.ie/eval and just fill out a couple of quick comments about the presentation. If you like this, I am involved in another event which is coming up this weekend called Data Weekender, where we've got 42 sessions on all sorts of things to do with Azure, Power BI, SQL Server, lots of things going on there. So you may want to check that out in there as well. So that's it, guys. Thanks very much for being here. End of the day, so I'm sure you're ready to knock off now. If there's any questions, I'm delighted to take them. Or if not, well, thanks a million for supporting this event today and all the sessions today. And keep your eye out for more great sessions. The the community spirit that exists inside in Power BI and Microsoft World is fantastic. Believe me, I've been in some of the other worlds, and the Microsoft World is brilliant for people sharing their information. So take advantage of it. All right, guys, thanks very much.
Hi, Mark. It's John. Great session. Yeah, there's been no questions asked on the GoToWebinar thing at the moment. Oh,
no problem.
Actually, no one's just been asked. Maybe something. It may be something faithful, but would the common data service help with any of this?
With the common data service?
Yes.
My short answer to that is I have no idea. The common data service is sitting in there as one of those things that I've got to go away and learn about. My basic naive understanding of it is, yes, it will help with all of these things because I see it being popped up as it will all integrate into common data service. My understanding of that is if you're a Dynamics customer, you're going to be a lot closer to that common data service because once you're in Dynamics, you can have the concept of a common object, like a common customer, and you're picking up on those models, and then everything else will pick around it. And if you're going on the whole Power form side of things, there also can be model-based forms which can use that in there as well. So the short answer is yes, but in terms of any depth, I could not give you any depth of detail behind how it would integrate.
Okay. So I'll say we'll wait a minute for if anybody else has got any more questions.
I wonder if I could ask a question, John. Sorry, this is Richard.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much for that. That was really interesting. I think so. I'm approaching this from the sort of my background's very much in kind of data engineering, so the very tightly governed, IT centric, historically at least, BI world. And it strikes me a lot of what you're doing here is really the very sort of democratizing data end in terms of putting a lot of these tools into users' hands. And it strikes me there's always challenges here about how you meet or how you square the circle of governance requirements with very sort of democratized access to tools like this. I wondered if you had any reflections on that.
You're spot on. All right, there are challenges in here. I suppose my largest client, who are a significant client, as in they are in the whole 1,000+ user conversation points. All right, they're actually having this kind of challenge there at the moment, and they would have, say, a lot of an existing investment in the Microsoft estate, and they have Microsoft Azure, and they have analysis services in there, and they have significant numbers of users. So I suppose when you're talking about Power BI, like anything, you've got to build a governance around it. Okay, you can kind of do a lot through, I suppose, your security holes, in that you can. So you'd have to step back first and kind of go, okay, if I just give Power BI to someone, all right, and I let them off and kind of give them a bit of training courses, what I'm going to get back from that, I'm going to get back all sorts of chaos from that. Okay, unless I give it to a competent person who's familiar with data, that's not going to end up, from an IT point of view, that's going to end up in an ugly place. All right, it could still be effective. All right, the end user might be delighted, but you're dreading the day that the end user changes job and suddenly they say, oh, IT, will you support that model from now on? All right, so I think there's a very natural understanding of IT fear that. Okay, so yeah, and if you are training up and asking users to kind of create their own bit of work, create their own reports, do their own data mashup in there, then you have to try to help them out along the way. And there are ways you can do that. I mean, you from the data flow side of things, certainly is a tool to use in that case. In the very least, you should try to have conversations around, well, what type of governed, sanitized data do we want to be generally available? So now, say if you got a data warehouse in the background, which is much more in your data engineering side of things, you might want to kind of go, well, look, when users are talking about customers and doing mashup stuff in here, at the very least, I want them to be hitting our data warehouse, right? As opposed to their own data sets. But even then, you might be saying, well, I don't actually want them to hit my data warehouse, because that brings up the whole question of, what if my data warehouse is doing an update, or I'm rebuilding indexes, or whatever it is, or suddenly 100 users hit my data warehouse and I'm doing my big data loads. So you kind of abstract that out a little bit, and you maybe use the whole data flow side of things to give that whole, okay, I've got the concept of data over here now, and it's generally available to users. So you start bringing things like that in there. I suppose you're trying to bring a little bit of IT manners around the back end side of things, while still allowing the front end user to kind of do lighter manipulation of data, where they kind of go, great, I have kind of clean data sets going on. Obviously, security becomes into play in that when you publish them up to PowerBI.com, do you allow them to publish anywhere? Probably not. Generally, you probably lock them down to, you can kind of publish to your own workspace, all right? What you do in your own workspace is your own mess, okay? The minute you start having a conversation about, I got something good here and I want to share it with my team, then you need a governance element to maybe come back into it again, where you're kind of going, okay, well, what actually are you sharing with your team in there now? And we need an IT overview. So I think that the product in itself doesn't lend itself to governance. However, there's no reason why you can't wrap governance around the whole process side of things in there, and even to the level of store safe and checking in your code and all that. There are things you can do. It doesn't fit naturally into the mix, but there are things you can build around it. So that's probably a long-winded answer saying you got to make it work for yourself, but there's no reason you can't get it to work for yourself in there as well and come up with something flexible, you know?
No, interesting to hear your reflections. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I mean, I think one of the key call-outs in there is, and I kind of struggle with this, and I was recently on a training course where it's kind of training people on Power BI, and the people on this were all IT people, yet I'm pretty sure that not many of them will really do much development in Power BI. I think they'll all definitely create reports, right? I think they'll definitely go in and connect to models and create the reports and publish it around in there. But of the 6 people I had in there, how many will do mashups? 1 or 2 of them, maybe. All right. So I think there tends sometimes to be a natural kind of, there can be a fear of, oh my God, everybody will be creating chaos. But actually, most people won't go down that area, I think. It's my own observation. You'll still find that there'll be the 1 or 2 people will kind of end up being the people who will build the more complicated solutions. So you maybe don't have to work with thousands of people around governance, but you might have to work with your classic power users to make sure that they know the right way of doing it. And then everything else will probably take care of itself.
Thank you.
All right, guys, anything else for me, or are we wrapping it up?
No, that's it. I think that's it. I think we're going to wrap up now for the day. Thank you very much to everyone who's come along. Thank you very much to Redgate for wanting to be at home for the 2 days. Thank you very much to Grant, who was up at ridiculously early time this morning. And also thank you very much to Anthony for recording all the sessions. He was also up early this morning and he's now waiting for us all to finish so he can turn off his streaming server. So please, if anyone's out there wishes to get in touch, we're on Twitter, hit me, Matt, or anyone else up directly, and we'll get back to you and we'll get the notes out about when YouTube videos and anything else comes through. Any speakers mail us the links to their slide decks, we'll distribute those as well. So thank you very much for turning up. I hope you had a great time, and thank you very much.